In this explainer, we're diving into the shocking domino effect that ignited the First World War. It's a story full of monumental miscalculations, tragic wrong turns, and a wildly misplaced sense of optimism that completely reshaped the modern world. Going into this, European emperors genuinely believed it was going to be a brief, glorious campaign. In fact, the army of Tsarist Russia was so convinced the war would only last a few days that they were actually worried about getting their uniforms dirty. They planned for couriers to bring their smart, heroic-looking dress uniforms from home after the victory, just so they wouldn't have to carry the extra weight on the march. That is how incredibly confident everyone was. But the tragic reality was far, far different. Instead of a few autumn weeks, the war dragged on for 1,566 agonizing days. The young men who marched off to battle absolutely were not coming home when the leaves fell. Instead, they'd be parceled back to their families in boxes, spending not just one season, but years trapped in the snow and mud. Part 1. The Spark in Sarajevo. A wrong turn that changed history. So how did this massive global tragedy actually start? Well, let's trace the events of June 28, 1914. That morning, Austro-Hungarian Archduke Franz Ferdinand actually managed to deflect a bomb thrown right at his open-roofed car. Talk about a close call, right? But that afternoon, on his way to the hospital to visit the people injured in that exact blast, his driver made a simple wrong turn. As the driver slowed down to reverse, an assassin struck. Franz Ferdinand's tragic last words to his wife were, "Sophie dear, don't die, you have to live for our children," but tragically, neither survived. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand that this wasn't just some random attack. It was a highly targeted hit, backed by Serbian intelligence, through an underground group known as the Black Hand. They were fighting to annex Bosnia, which was a territory of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the time, to create Yugoslavia, a unified land of South Slavic people. They orchestrated the whole thing, stationing 6 assassins along that fateful route. And the assassin who actually fired the shots? A 19-year-old student named Gavrilo Princip. But get this, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison rather than the death penalty, simply because Austrian law spared anyone under 20. Ultimately, though, he ended up dying naturally of tuberculosis just 4 years later in his cell. Part 2. The Web of Alliances. The dominoes of Europe. With the heir to the Austrian Empire dead, the dominoes really began to fall. At this point in history, Europe was heavily polarized into 2 major defense pacts, the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance. Basically, a fight with one nation inevitably meant a fight with all of them. Because Russia positioned itself as the protector of Orthodox Christian Serbia, Austria knew for a fact that retaliating against Serbia would bring Russia into the fold. So Austria secured the backing of Germany, locking those alliance gears firmly into place. Within a single week, ultimatums escalated into a terrifying, dizzying chain reaction of war declarations. And the gravity of this wasn't lost on the people pulling the levers either. When the German ambassador handed the formal war declaration to the Russian foreign minister, he actually began to weep. He knew full well how easily a war starts, but how impossibly hard it is to end. Part 3. Austria's Serbian struggle. The giant stumbles. Austria wanted to quickly crush Serbia in retaliation, but they immediately made a monumental blunder. Right as the war started, the Austrians actually had the Serbian top commander, Field Marshal Putnik, in their custody in Budapest. But in a completely bizarre act of misplaced chivalry, the old Emperor Franz Joseph just let him go. He was operating on the principle that arresting a guest in your home isn't brave. Well, that adherence to principle was a mistake that cost him dearly. Because man, did that decision backfire. General Putnik went right back to command the heavily outnumbered Serbian army, and they completely repelled the mighty Austrian force for over a year. At the River Kalubra alone, 76,000 Austrians were captured. The whole myth of Austria as an unstoppable great power was totally dashed to the ground. Part 4. The Schlieffen Plan. The 40-day countdown. While Austria was failing in the east, Germany was looking west. Germany was busy executing a massive, pre-calculated strategy known as the Schlieffen Plan. It was actually designed years earlier with a very specific timeline: knock France out of the war in exactly 40 days. The idea was to secure a swift victory in the west before pivoting all their forces to face Russia in the east. But the plan hit a massive brick wall right out of the gate. The Germans sent an ultimatum to neutral Belgium, but King Albert I flat out refused them passage. So instead of rolling through smoothly, Germany had to fight for 11 grueling days just to get past the heavy forts of Liège. And because Britain was the guarantor of Belgian neutrality, this aggressive move dragged the British Empire directly into the conflict. Plus, despite their grand plans for a lightning-fast strike, the German army's logistics were shockingly behind. In 1914, there were no tanks and barely any trucks. The entire massive advance relied heavily on foot soldiers marching day and night, with their heavy machine guns being hauled by horses, donkeys, and even dogs. This logistical reality severely slowed down their momentum. Part 5. The Battle of Marne, a 50-kilometer mistake. Despite those delays, the Germans managed a massive push, forcing the British and French forces into the Great Retreat and arriving just 40 kilometers from the gates of Paris. But right on the absolute edge of victory, the Germans made a fatal positioning error. They shifted their ranks and accidentally created a massive 50-kilometer gap in their own lines. And what's really fascinating here is that the French utilized cutting-edge technology, turbo surveillance airplanes, to fly over, photograph that exact vulnerability, and immediately notify their high command. To exploit this gap and save Paris, the French government actually fled the capital, leaving military governor Joseph Gallieni in charge. Desperate to get reinforcements to the front lines fast, he pulled off something incredible. He requisitioned 600 civilian taxis right off the streets of Paris. It became one of the war's most famous legends. Those 600 taxis rushed over 6,000 soldiers to the front in just 2 days, which was, for sure, a massive morale booster. However, historians today debate their actual military impact. The reality is the Germans likely retreated because they were terrified of being surrounded in that 50-kilometer gap by the broader Allied forces, rather than just the soldiers stepping out of the taxis. Part 6. The reality of trenches. 700 kilometers of stagnation. Ultimately, the Schlieffen Plan failed, and the retreating Germans fell back to the banks of the River Ain and dug in. The shock of this failure was so intense it allegedly caused the German central commander Helmuth von Moltke to suffer a total nervous breakdown. He was replaced shortly after, summing up the disaster with this incredibly desperate quote to his emperor. They realized right then and there that the quick victory was entirely lost. This strategic failure led directly to the defining horror of the Great War: trench warfare. Both sides dug deep into the mud, establishing a 700-kilometer scar across Europe, stretching from the sea all the way down to Switzerland. The illusion of a fast victory was replaced with years of agonizing, immobile slaughter. Literally millions of lives were sacrificed just to move the front line a few mere feet. Because Germany had rushed their troops to the west trying to capture Paris, they left their eastern flank dangerously exposed to 2 massive Russian armies pushing in. And with new empires like the Ottomans joining the bloodshed, this global tragedy was really only just beginning. So, with millions trapped in the mud, how many more autumns would pass before the leaves finally settled?